Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural, brought to you by Destiny Designers University, and myself, Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant, as your producer, and our co-host, Edward Pichardo Esquire and Royce Russell Esquire. Hey, Richard. Today, Mr. Russell will not be on camera. He's actually taking a break. Can you believe it? So we hope that he is enjoying his respite. This time in the year, it's usually a good moment to catch your breath when you can. So, we're happy that he's able to do that. But Edward Pichardo and myself will be holding it down with you, Richard. You'll be our other co-host today. Well, welcome to the show. I'm going to let Ed say hello to everyone, and then we're going to get into some pop culture news as well as what's happening with the legal and how that meets our culture. So over to you, Senor Pichardo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy St. Patty's Day. Want to say that. That's one of my favorite holidays. I got my, my green shirt on. No designs on it like, my partner Royce. Sometimes I get T-shirts with some stuff on it. This is a plain Jane green, in recognition of my Irish brothers and sisters. Hola, todo el mundo. Hola, buenas tardes. Y hola. Okay. Okay, Dr. Grant.
All right. And yes, happy St. Patty's Day. I actually shared something. I have part of my platform with the 4 leaves of Lux Clover. So it's St. Patty's Day. It's also anniversary for one of my business verticals. So the 17th of March is very significant. So welcome to the show. Hey, Deborah, appreciate you here as well. So, it seems like we keep losing a lot of legends because they are just aging. Nothing is promised. Every day is a gift. But when another one moves on, it just makes you feel some kind of way. And at least we're grateful that the memory of who they are continues to live on. So we've lost another very distinguished actor. And I know, Senor Pichardo, you've been doing some research on just all that makes this colorful statesman, as we would call him, who really contributed a lot in media by way of being in these movies. But there's a part of his history that a lot of people might not recognize. And at 81, we salute him and say, rest in peace, Mr. Cole.
No. I mean, Yaphet Kotto was a legend. I consider him basically on par with Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte in terms of his longevity. As you can see, he died at 81. He's been around. I mean, I remember watching him in the James Bond flick, Live and Let Die. And, he was like the villain because, all the Bond films have this like major villain and they're usually not black. They're usually white or at best Asian with Dr. No. But here, 1973 is the year that film came out. I was only 4 years old, but later on, once I got older, I would watch that movie on my mom's Zenith, that big, huge box in the living room. ABC would have the movie of the night on Sundays, and we would sit and watch it. And I remember watching that movie repeatedly. And I think in the movie he was Mr. Big and Dr. Kananga. It was set in Harlem, New Orleans, and the Caribbean. And, he went on to star in a number of other films and, the TV series, Homicide: Life on the Streets. He's from New York City, okay, born and raised. He was a practicing Jew, by the way. And he was also, his father reportedly is a member of the Cameroonian Royal Bell family. So there's African royalty right there. And one of the things about Yaphet that made him kind of unique was that, he was 6'4" and he was this black man who looked black with black features. So, it was like, here you go. This is what you get, and he was like an excellent, actor, well-spoken. Hey, Gianvallo, how you doing? And he, he was the man. So, may he rest in power. Yaphet, sorry to see you go, but, you lived a good life. They aren't really reporting exactly what happened. He died in the Philippines. So I guess, at some point we'll understand the cause of death. But, nonetheless, may you rest in peace, brother. For sure.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I didn't know he was raised under Judaism, like he practiced as a Jew.
Yeah, apparently his grandparents, his maternal grandparents, were at least one of them was Jewish, and I believe the other converted. And so, he grew up in that Jewish, household and raised that way. I don't know too much more beyond that, but that is what is reported in terms of his background, which of course, makes him unique and is an interesting unique feature and defeats many of the stereotypes that currently exist. Because when you think of somebody black, oh, they're Christian or they're Baptist or Protestant or whatever, or they're Muslim, right? You can't be Jewish, right? So here you go, somebody that defies the stereotypes, which I love, because I hate when people put other folks in a box and expect them to stay in that box. And people have these like ignorant expectations of each other in many cases. And, also with, the whole issue of him being linked to Cameroonian royalty, I invite those in the audience to explore their own ancestries and, their own background and their linkages to the motherland. Because I don't think enough of us actually do that. Our history didn't start with slavery. It goes much further back from that. We actually come from somewhere. In fact, when it comes to Cameroon, if you study the history, there are quite a number of people here in the Americas who have links to Cameroon because it was a place that was very heavily involved in the slave trade, and a lot of us descend from that. It's in West Africa, and I believe he is linked to the Douala people in that part of Africa, the Douala region. So it's something interesting to look at. I actually looked Yafet up years ago for some reason. I just was interested in finding out more about him. So when I got the news that he passed away either yesterday or the day before, I was like, wow, this is quite the coincidence here,
Absolutely. Well, I used that plug, and it wasn't a deliberate plug because you didn't know I was going to share this. My girlfriend, Dr. Gina Page, is the founder of AfricanAncestry.com. So as you mentioned that, and as we talk about encouraging our audience to find their roots, this is what she has done. And they've been able to help so many connect with who they are. I actually did my ancestry reveal. So I know I'm from the Guinea-Bissau tribe. And it's important to make that connection and know where we came from, because there are concentrated areas where the transatlantic slave trade really drew from. So when you're able to go back, it's an emotional experience when you understand, who you are. From Guinea-Bissau, that's where mine was traced on my maternal side. But this is just a shameless commercial. In full transparency, Dr. Gina Page is a friend, but she's doing phenomenal work. And if you haven't visited African Ancestry, I know there's DNA, there's the other 3andMe and 2andMe. There's so many of them that are coming out that are researching DNA more globally, but this is specifically for African origin. And you can trace on your maternal and you can also trace on your paternal side. So I think in honor of our dear brother, Koto, and understanding his Cameroon descent, it was great for us to just mention where you can get information. This is where the legal meets the cultural, right? So it's all about how do we tie it back in and how do we present information to you, our audience, that can help you to be empowered. So the whole first part of this show today, I'm going to let you say you had another comment there, and then we're going to do some other pop culture. But go ahead, Mr. Pichado.
No, it's amazing that you're talking about this because what was it, about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, I submitted a saliva sample to Ancestry DNA, and I got back, the results, and I actually have Cameroonian in my ancestry, Mali, Nigeria, as well as Spain, and then some other parts of the globe. And when you get that back, you're like, wow, because sometimes you have certain thoughts or ideas of where you derive from or where you come from. The only thing I'm concerned right now, though, is that there's some information out there and people are being told right now, which may or may not be the case, that or rather that they're being discouraged from participating in making these journeys of discovery, because supposedly the DNA information is going to be kept by some lab and used without your permission. And listen, all I can say is that right now in the world that we live in, I feel like your information is out there anyway. That's one thing. And that the experience of that you have when you get this information back is just it outweighs that, because the feeling that you get when you find out, oh, okay, and it's scientific. You're like, this is scientific. This is not just something somebody looking at you like your grandmother. You say, yeah, that's your baby. He look just like you. That's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with actual science. So I'm glad, as shameless as the plug may have been, right? I'm glad that we're presenting that to the audience, because I've encouraged friends. I say, listen, man, if you haven't done it, you should. And when I show them my own results, they're like, wow, man, that looks like something else, because it's detailed. They give you like percentages, and they continue, I guess, with the advancement of the science and of the techniques. They try to sharpen the information for you continuously. And it's also led to journeys of discovery in terms of my own Latino background. My parents and my family come from the Dominican Republic. And, some stuff has popped up even with that in terms of things that I wasn't aware of, because they also send you like documents that they think you might be interested regarding your background and ancestry. So.
Yeah, it's definitely something to inquire about. And with AfricanAncestry.com, they get really specific even into like what was happening in that season in time in history about the tribe, where they might have moved to, what African country they might have migrated to. So it's amazing. I did that, and I also did 23andMe. I know there's Ancestry.com, and there's so many. And, to your point earlier, they can get anything they want to get on you at this point. There's nothing under the sun. When we talk about where the legal meets the cultural, if I was like, no, I don't want to pay online because they're going to have my information. Wherever you're paying, even if you submit a check, they're processing it online. So those are just some cultural things for you to understand. The information technology, the way it is now, there's very little that is kept secret from those who want to get access to it. Of course, identity theft is something to be careful about, but don't be leery of just exposing yourself to what your history is if you have the opportunity to do it. That's just my opinion.
Exactly.
So now continuing with some more in pop culture, this one apparently got a lot of airplay because one of our artists had a little conversation with his son, and his son decided to make that conversation public. So if you haven't heard about it, I'm just interested for the parents that are on. Let's just have a little fun before we get into the serious stuff that's happening in the world.
A recording of an argument that the two of them had, and he posted, "This is why I'm done. No father should speak to their children like this. If I have any issues, it's because of this type of treatment that I deal with behind closed doors." Listen to this.
Okay, if you think I'm really good, but let me say it like this. When your ass starts you need to get your skinny ass back out the goddamn way before I put my foot in your I dare you. I dare you. I dare you. I dare you. Shut the up. I will put your neck before you ever disrespect me. I did it.
I don't see nothing wrong with it. My dad would talk to me. If I talk to my dad, crazy immediately. And that man is 33 years old. So absolutely, I don't see nothing wrong with it.
All right. Well, Kirk Franklin responded, and he did apologize.
We've tried for many years through counseling, through therapy, to try to rectify this private family matter. Recently, my son and I had an argument that he chose to record. I felt extremely disrespected in that conversation, and I lost my temper. And I said words that are not appropriate. And I am sincerely sorry to all of you. During that conversation, I called the family therapist and got that therapist on the phone to try to help. He never played that part of the recording. I'm not perfect. I'm human, and I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm trying to get it right. Please keep me and my family in your prayers.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those times when you got to hear all sides. But truthfully, I don't have.
No,
Truthfully, I don't have to hear all sides because that's family business. Like
that's family business. Absolutely.
That son is 33 years old. That's not a little boy. I don't know why Kirk spoke to him like that, but I'm sure he had a good reason. And
part of the reason is we can see, like, you release that audio trying to ruin your dad's career. Like you said, that's family business.
well, no, but we don't know how it got to that point, though. I mean,
It doesn't matter. We all have had arguments with
does.
our parents, our sisters, our brothers, our situations, and I would pray that no matter whatever is family business is family business. You don't release an audio try to embarrass your dad.
Yeah, of course.
No matter what it is.
But that's after the fact.
No.
We don't know what got them to that point. But like I said before, it doesn't matter to me because that's their family business. And that's a grown-ass man. That's a
he's not a child. He's 33 years old.
Man.
Carrie-Ann responded on his Instagram story. He wrote, he apologized to his fans only and not me. This is why I'm done. And then Kirk Franklin's daughter, who's Carrie-Ann's sister, Kennedy, went on social media and said, this wasn't the last family pic we took. I'm really tired of this. If you want to air out things, I can do that too. I still have the screenshots. We all have screenshots and recordings too. What was so bad about your childhood? You were a black privileged boy. You were legit fed with a silver spoon and given countless opportunities. You just didn't take them. So what? Now you're mad because you're 33 and have nothing to show? Here's what else Kennedy said.
I'll go to war. There's always another side to the story. And I'm sorry if somebody keeps on disrespecting me and spewing out falsely allegations that could ruin my reputation and like that. I would cuss them the hell out as well. Sorry.
Absolutely.
If I may, Dr. Grant.
Whew.
I think on just on a legal level, because some people this comes up and some people may be thinking about it from this perspective. I've had people over the years ask me, well, can somebody go ahead and record me, right? We're having a private conversation. I didn't give them permission to do that. Well, in the state of New York, as long as you're a party to the conversation, you can record that conversation. So I just want to, in terms of the legal meeting the culture, I just want to, put that little tidbit out there in terms of, the son and
Hold on.
Okay.
Attorney Pachado, wait, you can record. I just want to repeat it for the people sitting in the back who might not be listening to the show up close and personal. So you're able to record a conversation and the other party doesn't know?
Yeah, as long as you're a party to that conversation.
Wow, interesting. Where the legal meeting? Well,
yeah, because it's not considered, say, eavesdropping where you're listening in on somebody else's conversation. As long as you're the party to the conversation, you can record that conversation. And the reason why I put that out there, because just like you, a lot of people are like, "What? Oh my gosh!" And like, yeah, that's correct. So you should be careful of what you say when you're speaking to someone else. Period. Same way you're careful with those emails you send out or things that you send out in writing. When you're speaking to someone, you just don't know, and they can record you, and like, this is what you, as long, like I said, as long as they are a party to the conversation.
so here's the other part to that. So they can record. Can that recording be used in a court of law?
Yeah.
Jerry's like, yep, very simple rules to understand. And depending on the state, and the person needs to know that they're being recorded.
That's why I said New York State. There are other states that have different laws when it comes to that. But here in New York State, here in the Empire State, you can.
Well, I think it's just interesting. Like I said, we did a little change today and lighten it up before we go into the heavy, legal stuff when we're talking about what's happening now and what we're seeing unfold in two major political positions in the state of New York. But this, from a parent's perspective, it's just interesting. People put stars and personalities on a pedestal as if they're, so perfect that they could never slip and fall. And I think the Breakfast Club did a good job in saying that's personal family business. It was inappropriate for it to be released. And clearly, as we were listening, there were other children coming to the rescue. But, it's sensationalized. That's what the media does. They look for a good story and they're going to run that story. And if it could tarnish or damage someone's reputation, they're not really thinking about that. They just want to see, how many people are reading, tuning in to these stories. But I think it's a lesson to learn that it's just difficult times that we're living in parental relationships sometimes. And who was it? Eve, I don't know all their names on the show. He was like, look, my father talked to me like that if I talk crazy. So, it's just interesting to watch and see how things are changing and what's being raised as issues for concern with communication, and then just being aware. Anytime you open your mouth, anytime you send an email, anytime you post on social media, these things can come back to haunt you. So,
well, it's amazing how you've had with the internet, you've had this opening of the ability to allow other voices to become, say, journalistic voices, or to get views and listening audiences. Because, back in the day before the internet, in order for something to be widely disseminated, it had to go through either the print media, the newspapers, magazines, books, right? Or you had to do regular old TV with the what there were maybe I guess maybe 7, 8, 10 channels on there that you flip through, not including what was it, VHF or UHF. But now with the internet, there's a proliferation of voices, and just about anybody can put anything out there, and it gets picked up in the social media landscape. And I have no doubt in my mind that this I would call him a young man because he's acting like a young man. This young man's intent was to really embarrass his dad, which is sad, because I agree that this was private family business that should have stayed private. And the reason why I mentioned this change in terms of the landscape is I would imagine that no credible newspaper would have found that to be worthy of the type of mention that it's getting, because, folks back in the day understood that, look, listen, I'm not going to start throwing stones at that glass house because, I every so often I will lose my temper and say things that I regret, later on to my own children if they get me upset enough. And, this young man is 33, I guess he said. So it's like, wow, what are you doing? You know what I mean? I mean, if your dad is talking to you like that at this point, I got a feeling you must not be doing what you need to do as a man, and stepping up to your, responsibilities, with respect to what you've been given. Because, Kirk Franklin, from what I understand, he's been given a lot, and I got a feeling he shared a lot of it with his family, including his children.
And we're making assumptions because we don't know all the backstory.
Yeah, I don't know, but
the point to bringing it up here is, one, protect yourself with what you say, because it can be recorded. So that was the lesson learned, class. That you can use those recordings in the court of law in the state of New York. And if you're not viewing us from New York, check your local statutes so that you understand you don't have to give someone permission to record you on a call. So that's our pop culture for today. Now we're going to get into where the legal meets the cultural with some of not only local but national news, because this particular individual was all over the place when people were talking about the handling of the virus, the pandemic, and who was handling it well and doing well, and how the tides turn so quickly, right? With what's happening with investigation, even on the handling of the pandemic and the nursing homes, and now with allegations of inappropriate behavior, sexual harassment. Woo! Could Cuomo be impeached? What say you, Attorney Pichardo?
Well, it's interesting that you opened up talking about the handling of the pandemic. And the reason why I say that is because we feel that this is important for our audience to understand, not because, me personally, I don't have any personal opinion as to whether or not the governor should be impeached. Let's get that straight. But it's important that people have the information, because quite frankly, a lot of folks that I'm talking to, even with all the allegations involving these women, they are saying that, listen, the jury is out. I'm waiting to see what comes back from these investigations, both the Attorney General's investigation and the investigation that's supposed to be launched by the Assembly Speaker, Carl Hastie's, because they're looking at the overall handling of the pandemic, nursing home issue aside. A lot of people felt that during this time of crisis that the governor actually stepped up. However, though, this is a conversation to be had because, we just came out of a wicked United States presidential election, the invasion of the Capitol. We have a U.S. president that was impeached twice by the House of Representatives, the lower house, and then acquitted by the Senate. And so, naturally people, ask, well, listen, what happens here in our own state of New York with respect to our governor, who's the executive? See, in the federal government, the president is the executive there. Here in the state, in terms of state government, the executive is the governor. And so, recently, even after Letitia James, the AG, appointed 2 lawyers to investigate the allegations of now 7 women, Carl Hastie said the other day, hey, listen, we're going to do an impeachment investigation. So naturally, per the Constitution. And so the question comes up, well, what exactly are the procedures for impeachment on the state level? And where you would look is you would look at Article 4 of the New York State Constitution, Section 24, the court for the trial of impeachments in the New York State Constitution. And by the way, there only one governor in history, a New York State governor, has been impeached, William Sulzer, sometime in, I believe, 1913, early in the 20th century. And so just to explain, what happens is that the Assembly, investigation aside, what happens is the Assembly is the one where these procedures start with. That body, that's the lower house, just like the House of Representatives is the lower house in the federal government and the Senate is the upper house. Here in New York State, you have the New York State Assembly and you have the New York State Senate. And so the Assembly is the lower house. So they would be the ones that would draft articles of impeachment, and the majority of their members would vote on that and decide whether or not these charges should then be tried in the New York State Senate. Now, the procedures are a little different from what happens in the federal government. Similar, but a little different. And there's a couple of other things to keep in mind. On the federal level, in the U.S. Constitution, there is a definition, albeit somewhat unclear, of what is an impeachable offense. What can the president in that instance be impeached for? And there it simply states high crimes and misdemeanors. There is no such language in the New York State Constitution. So, of course, that's an issue. And, that weighs in favor of what the Speaker, Carl Hastie, is doing here. And, because he said, listen, we need to have an investigation of what exactly the governor is accused of doing before we decide whether we're going to move forward for impeachment. That's if, of course, he doesn't resign, which a number of, legislators, both on the federal and local level, are asking for. Once again, I have no opinion there right now, but because of this lack of definition of what's impeachable, that certainly weighs in the favor of the Speaker in terms of having that properly legally articulated before moving forward. The problem there, of course, is, and this was mentioned the other day, I believe by the Speaker himself, was that they're going to have to get a budget approved for the hiring of these counsel, and the governor, being he controls the office of the budget, is going to have to approve. And I'm not sure how that exactly is going to go down.
Break it down into simple terms. So it means the governor has to approve the hiring of those who are going to litigate a case against him?
Well, the budget for it,
Budget for it. Okay.
yeah, because the speaker can say, listen, we want to hire this firm to do it. Here's how much it's going to cost. You need to approve this appropriation. But, of course, you're going to the accused and asking, hey, listen, we need some money to pay for this. And he may say, shit, I would hire the cheapest law firm I could find. I'm not approving those guys, Fine, do we cheat him do we cheat him and how to represent the assembly on this one? Just a little humor here, but anyway, once the assembly does the articles of impeachment, or by a majority of its members, then it goes to the Senate. And what happens is that, as I mentioned, there's a court for the trial of impeachment. Who sits on that court? The lieutenant governor would sit on, and this is a little interesting because the language in the Constitution is on the trial of an impeachment against the governor or lieutenant governor, neither the lieutenant governor nor the temporary president of the Senate shall act as a member of the court. But, when you read, other materials on how this procedure is supposed to go, the way it states is that the lieutenant governor would be on that court. The 7 members of the New York State Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in the state of New York, because you have the Court of Appeals, and below it you have what's called the appellate division, which there are different appellate division courts throughout the state. And then below that you have what's called the Supreme Court. You would think that, the Supreme Court is the highest court. No, in New York State, it's the Court of Appeals, and there's 7 members of that court. The crazy thing is that all 7 members of the Court of Appeals have been appointed by Andrew Cuomo. So, some people may say, wait a minute, Ed, the people who he appointed are going to be deciding his fate. Well, these are learned judicial officials who I believe would never divorce themselves from their impartiality. Okay, but some people may suspect otherwise. I leave that to them.
That's fair, but that's fair though. I chuckled because, of course, we expect that when you're elected or appointed to those highest positions in governing, that it would be an impartial situation. But if all 7 were put there by the person that you have to decide their fate, that really, it speaks to like, whoa. And people might feel that it might not happen, but I think that's just, let's be honest. People are going to say and wonder, would that really be the situation? So that's why we're talking about it. Hi, Monica. Hey, Jerry. Hey, Sharon, thank you again for tuning in. So we're breaking this down because that's what we do on the show, showing you what's going on so people can understand it. Because I hear, as they would say on the streets, folks are like, wait a minute, we didn't impeach someone who allowed an insurrection, people died, other, gross offenses, and they didn't get removed or resigned. Are we really going to do that? And I find it interesting, the conversations that are going back and forth, and whether public opinion will have a part to play in how all of this plays out with the elected officials in the assembly gathering and doing their due diligence as to what case may or may not exist.
And part of this court is also the members of the Senate. And the difference between the assembly and the Senate is that while the assembly only needs a majority for the articles of impeachment, in the Senate you need a 2/3. Okay, 2/3 of those members, presumably including the court, to find for impeachment, if indeed that's what they find after the case is tried in the Senate. And the only other individual that this has been tried with, as I may have stated earlier, is a governor by the name of William Sulzer, who apparently almost there seems to be a universal understanding or agreement amongst those who have looked at that impeachment that it was politically driven. I don't know if any of you have heard of Tammany Hall. It was a very powerful Democratic political machine out of New York City that controlled politics in the early 20th century. And apparently he started bucking the machine and going against them. They wanted him to hire or to appoint a member of the machine to a position as highway superintendent at the time, and he wouldn't do it. And so they were like, you're going against us. We're going to take you out. And indeed they did. They brought him up on impeachment for things, some things he had apparently done before he even became the governor. And what's interesting here is that the lieutenant governor at that time became, the governor upon his removal, impeachment, and became the first Irish Roman Catholic governor, I believe, of any state or any, government. And it's St. Patty's Day. That's crazy, right? That's a crazy coincidence. So I just wanted to point that little factoid out there, which is crazy. His name was last name Glenn. But in any event, just to point out that in the month of the woman, we're looking at the possibility of having our first female governor if this goes down a certain way. If either the governor steps down or the governor is impeached, and that would be Kathy Hochul. And she is out of Buffalo. She's a former congresswoman who became the lieutenant governor in 2015. And also, I want to also mention this as an interesting fact for those who haven't been paying attention. If you remember, in the last election before Jumaane Williams, public advocate Jumaane Williams, ran and successfully got the position of public advocate, he was running for lieutenant governor against Kathy Hochul. And he put on a hell of a race, by the way. He got around the state, and then he was talking to folks, this black man out of Brooklyn, and almost got it. And if things would have gone down a certain way, we might have had our second, a black governor here, under certain circumstances. So, history is interesting in terms of the way it goes down. And I'm also looking at the confluence of events here because in the month of the woman, this governor could possibly be going down based on conduct that has been alleged against him for inappropriate conduct against a series of women, 7 of them. And, this article right here didn't come out because of the allegations by the women. It came out because of the allegations that surfaced from the nursing home issue and the lack of transparency with the number of deaths and some of these nursing home residents being moved from the hospitals they were in after being infected by COVID and being moved back into these nursing homes. And some people are saying infecting, other residents and causing an increase in deaths at these nursing homes. This came out, based on that, not, the allegations. And, now we have a situation where we might have our first female governor. And by the way, the majority leader of the Senate, the temporary president, the president pro tem, is Andrea Stewart Cousins, a woman leading the New York State Senate in the month of the woman. This, you can't make this stuff up. You just can't.
And it's where the legal meets the cultural, because she has been representing us well. And as an African-American woman in leadership, it was historic for her to assume this position. And like we said, just for the record, we're not talking about whether the governor is guilty or not. That is not our place. This will be played out in the process of what we have instituted in our government. But it's interesting to understand what is happening, and that because, to your point, the Constitution had a lot of gray area when it comes to what's an impeachable charge. It puts New York and the assembly members that we've elected, let's go back to what we talked about on the show before. how important it is to be involved in your local elections, no matter where in the country you live or where in the world you live, because these are the people in times like these that will be representing your interests, not just for the day-to-day common courtesies per se that we should have with education and with senior care and infrastructure. It's on issues like this when leadership is being challenged because of some inappropriate behavior. Who did you put there to speak to what should or shouldn't be done? So we just can't be on the sidelines when it comes to our civic duty. We need to be engaged. And that's why we focus on so many of these lessons during the show, so you can be engaged in understanding how it's playing out. And you could ask your own questions. You feel free to contact the assembly person in your district. If you're in New York, ask them what their thoughts are. How are they going to address this? How are they representing your district? That's your right. You put them in office. Your state senators, asking them, well, what are your thoughts on this? You have every right to express your concerns around how this plays out in the state because you put them in office. A public servant is there to serve the needs and the constituents that they are representing. So it's an opportunity for you to get really involved in how this plays out. And I'm interested to see if they're going to propose changes to the Constitution in this particular clause that is so vague. Do you think that's something that'll come out of this?
It may. Now, just to be clear, there is some history to look into with respect to this. At one time, my understanding is that there was language and it was removed, or at least there was a previously, I think as far back as 1777, the law was that the impeachment could take place based on or corrupt practices. There was also a mention mirroring the United States Constitution, high crimes and misdemeanors. So there's some legislative history there. It's just that it's not in the Constitution like it is in the U.S. Constitution. And there was, I believe, a time back, I think in 1847, when there was a proposal to place some sort of language in the Constitution defining what was impeachable and what wasn't. But it didn't take place, so it still remains absent from the Constitution. But an incident like this, and often incidents do trigger changes in law, amendments to any constitution, and this may well cause this to be revisited. And there may be a proposal to add that a clause such as that one to the New York State Constitution. I believe in order for that to take place, you would have to have a 2 consecutive referendums, a constitutional convention. It can only take place within a certain amount of years. I'm not sure. There have been attempts to change the New York State Constitution, which have been unsuccessful because there, of course, are certain groups that, groups kind of interest groups have battled over some of the language that's currently in the Constitution when it comes to a number of items there, and they do not want the Constitution to be disturbed. So traditionally, it's been very difficult to make changes to the actual Constitution. It's easier, of course, to make changes to the statutory law because the law gets introduced during a legislative session. It's passed in both houses, then signed by the governor. But a change to the actual Constitution is much more difficult than that. So, but yeah, we may see a proposed amendment with respect to defining what exactly is an impeachable offense, and more so because you do not want a governor to be able to be impeached purely off of whatever the political sentiments are at the time. Let's say you have someone who, the legislature is seeking removed purely because they won't do something that certain folks and certain interest groups want them to do. And there should be some definition as to what's impeachable and what's not. And by the way, unlike the federal government, where the issue was whether you had a majority and whether that majority would vote for impeachment in the Senate, say 2/3, the Democrats are in control of both the Assembly and the Senate. The majority is a little, somewhat narrower in the Senate than it is in the Assembly, but I would imagine with this Democratic governor, if it got to that point where there had to be a vote, I got a feeling that those Republicans would be more than happy to vote for impeachment along any Democrats that are willing to go ahead and make up that 2/3. So, we'll see. We'll see.
We'll see. Stay tuned to what's next. But, the news keeps unfolding because in addition to that, we have another situation. It's popping for New York right now. Sometimes we're in different states and highlighting what's going on. But this is very significant in regards to the relationship with the former number 45. Manhattan DA Cy Vance won't run for a fourth term as criminal probe into ex-President Trump's taxes intensifies. So this was an interesting take in the media about what's going on about this, because they were able, if I'm not mistaken, to get the right to go after his taxes. Like, they didn't get thrown out, and he knew there might be some backlash for that. I think that's some of the speculation around why he wasn't pursuing a fourth term, but he made that decision earlier on, correct?
Yeah, I mean, this has been going on for a while. My understanding is that people normally, when you look at whether or not somebody is going to run for re-election, you look at their fundraising activity, and apparently, he didn't really fundraise. I think his raising might have been as low as $2,000, and so, there was already an assumption that he wasn't going to run. What this did was it made it official. And so, and people, and apparently the article is mentioning the criminal probe into Trump's taxes only because that office, the New York County DA's office, for years during the Trump presidency, they had been attempting to get these tax records, and now that they finally have them, it's like, okay. And I believe a number of the individuals who are running for that office seem to have, I believe they have pledged that they will, continue that probe, go forward with it. I believe that the ex-president has already been subpoenaed and is been ordered to testify. So, things are really heating up and ramping up there in terms of getting a look at these taxes, deposing this individual to, get to question him about what is contained in those documents, whether they contain any false statements, improprieties, violations of the law that could potentially be subject to criminal prosecution. So, it's just a really exciting time. I would welcome all Manhattan, New York County residents to really look at these candidates. I currently live in Manhattan, and I actually got a call from a pollster, asking me about the candidates and how I felt. I won't reveal at this time who it is that I'm voting for, but I would imagine some people can guess, but I think this is a really interesting one, that he's leaving. I mean, from what I understand, he actually decided not to run for re-election because that Harvey Weinstein scandal and his office declining to prosecute him at first placed him in hot water. Now, later on, he did prosecute and move forward and got a conviction, but a lot of folks felt like too little, too late. And then you had the case with Nafissatou Diallo, and her being allegedly attacked by Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who was about to run for Prime Minister of France. And the office under his leadership declining to prosecute that case. My good late friend Ken Thompson was representing Nafissatou Diallo in that case and was calling for the prosecution of that case. And Cy Vance offices declined to prosecute this very powerful French man on that. And so I think it was instances like that led to his some would say political demise when it came to running for re-election, because this is a time period in history right now where the sisters ain't having it. They just not having it. They're saying, you're not gonna push me to the side and ignore what I have to say. And and this is something that's starting to show up in a lot of different landscapes. Like, I know this wasn't planned, but right now there's a very, very vigorous conversation taking place about what happens on college campuses when a young woman accuses, or just, any young person accuses someone else of engaging in some sort of sexual misconduct, and how that's handled, how that's investigated by the university. So, that's an issue to maybe discuss in a future show. But once again, there's been, a lot of stuff going on in this arena about, how do you handle these incidents? And then the sisters not having it. The sisters aren't having it,
And here's the part. It's not new news. Like, especially the campus situations and how universities choose to pursue these allegations that come out. It's been a long-standing problem. I remember back in my undergraduate days, we had a huge scandal at my university that got public attention. So we just hope that, as you said, the citizens aren't having it, but more than not having it, because I don't think we ever did. We talked up, but that the volume is louder now so that something actually gets done. And, no one is safe at this point, right? When it comes to hiding behind titles or hiding behind, whatever protections you think that you have, because folks are purposely looking for and seeking out offenders and making sure that there is some justice that comes to it. So, where the cultural meets the legal, it's about really just understanding all the different things that are happening in real time. Like, it's all happening at the same time, so much that we're addressing. We just want to stay ahead of the curve, so to speak, and understanding how we participate. Because sometimes you can't just be a spectator, right? You have to get involved. And that involvement is different ways. Everyone is not going to march, as, Mr. Russell loves to say. You might be a juror. And that's a part of participating, because you're there to be able to try a case and to represent that particular person on trial, someone who looks like them, who understands the cultural behind it. It might be writing letters, it might be petitioning, it might be lobbying. There are many different ways that you can participate in our civic structure, but sitting on the sidelines like, oh, I'm not going to be bothered. Oh, this will pass, or this is in the news. That's not the attitude that gets us the change. It's those who are courageous enough to open up their mouths, to learn what they need to learn so they can use the system to work on their behalf and work with legal experts that can get them the results that they need, like Mr. Edward Pichardo Esquire and Royce Russell Esquire. That's why we do the show. This was our way of launching in the middle of COVID, not only to understand some of what we saw with the racial unrest, but just simple everyday civics 101, which is not necessarily taught in our schools. It's not necessarily a part of conversation where you hear people going to school board meetings or knowing who's sitting on their local police board or being a part of conversations with your elected officials. These are all the people who affect your life every day. How you get to work, the buses, the trains that you use, the services that are provided for your children at school, how our elders are taken care of in their community. So turning a blind eye doesn't help. And if you're not a part of the solution, what they say, then you're a part of the problem. So we want to be a part of the solution on this show.
And it's interesting that, you mentioned sitting on the sidelines, because like this seventh accuser, in terms of the governor, apparently she reveals what happened to her employer, and her employer then, contacted law enforcement, and the question is what was the follow up after that? I mean, this investigation, I think, is going to yield some interesting facts or issues in terms of what exactly happened, because in many cases, especially when it comes to this arena, people are always like, well, why did she wait so long to say anything? And sometimes it may not be a matter whether she waited long. The question is whether there were people who had the information and sat on it or did nothing with it, or then decided that, we need to do something to stop this from going any further. So this is gonna raise some interesting questions when it comes to some people looking themselves in the mirror and saying to themselves, well, where was I? What was I doing in the moment? When things were happening? Did I sit on the sidelines? Did I speak up? Did I only look at my own interests? Was I in fear of disfavor? Because this stuff takes tremendous courage. Because sometimes you end up putting your actual career on your line when you decide to take certain positions. And you look at that when you think about a lot of the figures in the civil rights movement, about invariably any person that was part of the civil rights movement that is still alive, that I get to speak to, will usually share some story about being subjected to some level of harassment, ridicule, and having to step up with courage in the face of all that and still say, what's going down is not right, and I'm gonna speak up. And they will look at Dr. King, celebrated icon, but during his time he was a reviled figure, criticized by other members of the clergy, by the way. What are you doing all that for? Running around with all these protests? Why can't you just quietly minister to your flock? Why are you concerned about all this or that? And he wasn't having it. It takes tremendous courage. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Absolutely. And I don't feel that people should be victimized twice. When you go through something, and because it's now coming to the forefront, it's all of this that's in question. So that's another show for another day. We definitely will be watching and hearing a lot about what's happening with the accusations. And the governor has two sets of accusations. It's the handling of COVID-19, the nursing homes, and these sexual harassment charges. So it's a full plate that everyone involved will be deciding what that looks like. We're not in the judgment seat. We're not the judge and juror. We're just bringing you information so that you can follow along and be equipped with watching the process. So just even understanding at a very basic level, the assembly has to figure out what is an impeachable offense, because it's so vague in New York, what that looks like, and then what the next steps are. And Cy Vance, we wish him well. We wish everybody well on this show as he moves on to do what's next for him. But this is also another reminder that we talk about here on the show. It's an election. So that means there's going to be somebody else in one of the most high profile seats in the country. The Manhattan DA is looked at all across the board. And this next person who takes that seat has to be ready day one to deal with a lot of the spillover from Cy Vance's administration, but also be able to be courageous enough to lead when we talk about criminal justice reform, when we talk about all of what's happening in real time in New York. So pay attention. If you have friends, if you're not in New York and you have friends who are, and thanks, John, make sure that you're telling them to find out the facts about each candidate. Just don't go into voting for people just because you have to vote. We're grateful that you exercise the right, but be knowledgeable when you go to the polls. What are you really voting for, and how is that impacting your community? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Senor Pichardo, for your final comments as we wrap up yet another episode of Speaking Legally.
Yeah, speaking of people paying attention to what's going on, I want to give a quick shout out to some of my folks on Long Island. They need to take a good look at what's being referred to as the People's Plan, with respect to changes in law enforcement out there. Apparently, several groups have formed a coalition to recommend some very deep changes in the way the police carry themselves in both Nassau and Suffolk County. So please take a look at that for those who reside in that part of the state. I think you're going to find it, quite interesting, ranging from how police handle, calls when someone is going through some emotional distress to something as common as the body cameras, whether they send, cops to deal with situations that could better be handled by someone that's, has better training with respect to dealing with, psychological episodes. So please, take a look at what's going on out there. Also pay attention to what's going on in Minnesota in the George Floyd trial. Apparently, the defense attorney is now trying to use the awarding of the $27 million to the family as a reason for a change of venue, because it could deleteriously affect the impartiality of the jurors. So that's something to pay attention to that could, put a cog in the wheels of justice there. So, pay close attention to that.
Well, we'll be watching it, and we did cover some of that as it's been unfolding. So push a pin in it. We'll be back 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here with Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. Have a great week. Stay safe. Happy St. Patty's Day, and don't drink too much if you're doing that today. Bye bye, everyone.
All right, bye.